All right, strap yourselves in, everyone, because today we're going deep, deep into this wild new book, The Motion of Everything, a story of reality.
Wow, yeah.
And just from the title alone, you get a hint of where this is going.
Right.
This book is saying everything, and I mean everything, comes down to one thing, motion.
Really flips the script.
Yeah, forget particles, forget forces, even the Big Bang as we usually picture it. It's all about motion, motion, motion.
It is, and you know what's really cool?
What's that?
The book really takes the Big Bang and flips it on its head.
Okay.
Instead of this void, you know, the classic picture we all have.
Yeah.
It suggests that there was a state of pure motion, constant motion, that existed before the Big Bang even happened.
So no empty void, just motion upon motion upon motion.
That's right.
Okay, I'm going to need some help wrapping my head around this whole motion before the bang concept.
Sure. Imagine kind of like a cosmic dance,
Okay.
but like without any dancers or even a stage. It's just this pure, undifferentiated motion. Just constant shifting, restructuring. Like, think about it like a cosmic puzzle that's always rearranging itself before any pieces are even recognizable.
Okay, so then at some point, those pieces do become recognizable.
Exactly. So picture this. You have this equilibrium of pure motion, right?
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden there's like a tiny disturbance, like a little flicker, a little hiccup. And that sets off this huge cascade effect. And that's what the book calls the motion cascade event, which is basically their fancy way of reframing the Big Bang.
So instead of an explosion into space, it's more like a sudden reorganization of motion that's already there.
Yeah, you got it. It's all happening within this pre-existing state of motion.
Okay.
And from that cascade, you know, you get the structures that we know today, stars, galaxies, planets, all that jazz.
But the motion never went away.
Never. It's like the fundamental ingredient of everything. It's the cosmic dough, so to speak, that everything else is made from.
Interesting analogy. So even stuff like energy and matter, you know, the things we normally think of as totally separate, this book says they're also just forms of motion.
That's right.
All right, lay it on me. The book's take on energy and matter was what really got me hooked.
Yeah, well, forget those textbook definitions, right?
Right.
The book says energy isn't this mystical substance that exists out there. It's all about motion. Specifically, it's synchronized loops of motion.
Synchronized loops, huh?
Yeah, think about it like imagine these loops constantly interacting, evolving, bouncing off of each other. And that's what creates the building blocks of, well, everything.
Okay, so what about matter then? I always thought of atoms as these tiny little solar systems with electrons whizzing around a nucleus.
We'll toss that image right out the window.
Okay.
The book says there are no solid objects. Not really. Particles aren't things, they're patterns.
Patterns of what?
Patterns of motion. Stable patterns of motion that our senses perceive as, well, as matter. It's all about how these patterns are constantly adjusting, shifting, trying to find a balance with each other. And that happens on every level, from tiny atoms to huge galaxies.
So if I could zoom in close enough on, I don't know, this table or something,
Right.
I wouldn't see solid stuff, I'd just see motion.
You got it. Vibrating energy, always in motion, even the universe's expansion, you know, the way everything's constantly moving apart. It's not about going into some empty space. It's just about finding a new equilibrium, a new balance within this ever-shifting sea of motion.
That's pretty mind-blowing. But are there any, like, real-world, tangible examples in the book to show how this works?
Oh, absolutely. The book has a whole section on astronomical objects, like stars, for instance. We normally think of them as these giant burning balls of gas, right?
Right.
But the book looks at them completely differently. It says that stars are massive energy redistribution centers.
Redistribution centers.
Yeah. They're constantly taking in motion, processing it, and then sending it back out into the universe. It's all about maintaining this dynamic equilibrium.
So our sun isn't just burning fuel, it's like a giant cosmic dance floor, right?
Pretty much. It's constantly influencing the motion of everything around it. The Earth, the other planets, even us.
Okay, that's pretty wild. So if everything's moving and grooving to the beat of the sun, what about planets and their orbits?
Oh, that's another area where the book totally breaks the mold. Forget everything you learned about gravity being this force that pulls things together.
Wait, so planets don't just fall into orbit? I'm already feeling a bit lost.
No worries, no worries. It's actually simpler than you think. The book says planets don't fall into orbit. They find paths of motion equilibrium.
Paths of what?
Motion equilibrium. Think of it like finding the perfect groove in a cosmic dance. The planet's motion syncs up perfectly with the star's motion, and that creates a stable orbit.
So instead of being pulled in by the star's gravity, it's more like finding a comfortable rhythm in this cosmic dance floor.
Exactly. It's all about harmony and balance.
But hold on, if there's no gravitational pull, how do we explain what we experience as gravity here on Earth? You know, the feeling of being held down, objects falling.
And this is where things get super interesting. The book redefines gravity as a synchronization of motion across different energy scales.
Okay, so break that down for me.
It's like, imagine all these objects in the universe are doing this cosmic ballet, right?
Yeah.
They're all influencing each other's movements, but it's subtle, not a direct pull, but a synchronization of their motion.
I think I'm starting to get it, but it's definitely a lot to wrap my head around.
It is.
So we've covered motion before the Big Bang. Motion is energy and matter, motion making up the stars, planets, and even gravity.
Yeah.
Where do we even go from here?
Well, things get really crazy when the book tackles the concept of life itself.
Oh boy, I can't wait to hear that. But we'll have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
That's good.
Okay, so we left off talking about stars and gravity all being about motion. But I'm really curious about how this book explains something as complex as life. Is that even possible?
Oh, yeah, and this is where it gets really mind-blowing. The book says, and hear me out, life, just like everything else, arises from motion.
So life isn't some magical spark or random chance. It's all motion.
That's right, but it's not just molecules randomly bumping into each other in some primordial soup, right?
Yeah, I was picturing that whole primordial soup thing.
Yeah, well, the book throws that old idea right out. Instead, it describes DNA, RNA, all those building blocks of life as these incredibly complex motion loops.
Motion loops. I'm trying to visualize this.
Okay, imagine these loops are constantly storing and transmitting patterns of motion, like a code, but a code for survival that drives all of life's processes.
So instead of a blueprint, DNA is more like a set of instructions for a microscopic dance that keeps life going.
You got it. An evolution. It's not about random mutations and survival of the fittest. It's about motion adapting to motion over very long periods.
Okay, so it's like a constant refinement of those dance moves, figuring out what works best for survival in a given environment.
Yeah, perfect analogy. It's a constant dance-off between different forms of motion.
All right, I think I'm following so far. But what about consciousness? That seems like a massive leap from stars and planets. How does this book even approach consciousness in terms of motion?
Hold on tight, because this is where it gets really wild. It suggests that consciousness emerges when motion becomes aware of itself.
Motion becoming aware of itself. Okay, I need more.
It's all about feedback loops. Our brains are incredibly complex systems of motion, right? And when those motions start observing and reflecting on themselves, that's when consciousness arises.
So you're saying my thoughts, my feelings, everything I experience.
Yeah.
It's all just patterns of motion in my brain becoming self-aware.
That's exactly what the book is suggesting. It's a radical proposition, but think about it. If our thoughts are essentially patterns of motion, could we learn to manipulate those patterns to influence our consciousness? It could have huge implications for future technologies.
Wow, that's both amazing and a little terrifying. Makes you wonder about free will, too. Are we really in control, or are we just along for the ride in this dance of motion?
Those are some deep questions, and the book definitely delves into them. But before we disappear down that existential rabbit hole, let's bring it back to something a little more concrete. The book also applies this motion-centric view to human activity on a larger scale.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does the motion of everything idea explain things like civilization and technology?
It might seem like a jump, but the book argues that civilization is just motion scaling up. It's like when individual dancers come together to form a larger, coordinated group.
So society's just a bunch of individual motions interacting and creating larger patterns of motion.
Exactly. Think about things like language, music, art. They're all forms of motion manipulation and communication.
So even something as abstract as language is, at its core, just motion.
Precisely. When we speak, we're creating structured patterns of sound waves, which are literally a form of motion. Music does the same thing, tapping into our emotional responses to different motion patterns.
And what about technology? It seems like we're constantly trying to control motion with technology.
Absolutely. The book sees technology as an extension of our ability to manipulate and harness motion. From the simple tools of early humans to the smartphones we have today, we're always finding new ways to direct motion and achieve our goals.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But if everything is motion, what about time? And what about all those fundamental forces like gravity and electromagnetism?
This is where the book throws a major curveball. It says that time, as we typically understand it, doesn't actually exist. What we perceive as time is simply a way of measuring changes in motion states.
Wait a minute, are you saying that clocks aren't measuring time? Then what are they measuring?
Think of it like this. A clock is just tracking cycles of motion, like a pendulum swinging or the vibrations of atoms. Even a year is just one full cycle of the Earth's motion around the sun.
So times is really just a way of measuring motion changes. Wow, that's trippy. What about all those forces we learned about in physics? Are those just illusions too?
The book claims that those forces are just manifestations of motion adjusting to itself. It's not that they're not real, it's that they're not separate things acting on objects. They're just part of how motion works on a fundamental level.
So gravity isn't a pull, but objects syncing up their motion. And electromagnetism is about the motion of charged particles.
That's the basic idea. It's challenging those traditional Newtonian physics models we've all grown up with.
So all those physics textbooks, with their laws and equations, are just describing the dance of motion without really grasping its true nature.
That's a pretty radical idea, right? But it makes you think. Maybe we've been so busy categorizing and labeling all the different expressions of motion that we've missed the forest for the trees.
We've been focused on the individual dance moves instead of the choreography of the universe.
Exactly. And once you grasp that, it changes everything, even the way we think about the end of the universe.
Speaking of the end, how does the book explain that if everything is motion, does the universe just keep moving forever?
That's the thing. The book says there is no end, only transformation. Motion never stops. It just constantly restructures itself. Think of it like a dance that never ends. It just keeps evolving.
So even black holes, those things we often see as cosmic destroyers, are just part of the dance.
Absolutely. The book views them as extreme motion zones, places where motion is so intense that it warps space and time. And maybe, just maybe, they're even pathways to other universes. Who knows?
Now that's a thought. What about dark energy and dark matter? Those mysterious things that are supposedly shaping the fate of the universe.
The book tackles those head-on. It suggests that dark energy is just a large-scale redistribution of motion that we haven't fully understood yet. And dark matter. It might just be an illusion, a misinterpretation of how motion synchronization works on really vast cosmic scales.
So it's like we've been looking at these things as separate forces, when really it's all just different expressions of this one underlying principle of motion.
That's the core idea, and it's a powerful one. The book argues that everything in the universe, from the tiniest particles to the largest cosmic structures, can be explained by this one simple concept: motion.
It's both elegant and incredibly mind-boggling at the same time.
Oh,
It's like we've been handed a new lens for viewing reality.
exactly. One that reveals a universe far more dynamic and interconnected than we ever imagined.
I know I'm still processing all of this, but it's exciting. It feels like a whole new way of understanding the universe and our place in it.
It is, and I think we need to pause here and let all of this sink in for our listeners, because what's even more fascinating is how this concept can be applied not just to the universe, but to our own lives.
I don't know about you, but my head is still spinning after all that. Motion is everything, huh? It's really incredible how much this one idea explains.
Yeah, it really is a total paradigm shift. But what's even cooler is that it goes way beyond just explaining how the universe works. It can actually change how we think about solving problems, how we innovate, even how we approach our own lives.
Okay, so how does understanding this motion of everything idea actually help us, in our day-to-day lives?
Well, think about it. If we really accept that everything is in motion, constantly changing and adapting, then that should make us more flexible in our own thinking, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Instead of searching for these rigid solutions that we think will last forever, maybe we should be more focused on strategies that can evolve as things change.
So instead of trying to, put everything in a box, we should be looking for the underlying motion and, figuring out how to work with it.
You got it. It's all about understanding the flow, the currents, and finding ways to harmonize with them, or maybe even give them a little nudge in the direction we want to go.
Interesting. So how could we actually use that, practically?
Oh, the possibilities are huge. I mean, imagine technologies that can adapt to their environment in real time, or social systems that are more resilient and responsive to change.
That would be pretty amazing. You know what's really got me thinking, though? This idea of death. If motion never really ends, if it just transforms, does that mean death isn't really the end?
That's a really profound insight, and it's something that a lot of spiritual traditions have been saying for ages.
Yeah.
But what's so cool is that this book is approaching it from a scientific angle, and it's giving it this whole new level of like weight, you know?
Right. It really makes you question everything we think we know about mortality. It's like even when our physical bodies stop working, the motion that makes us who we are, it keeps going in some form.
Yeah, it definitely challenges those traditional beliefs. And it brings up some pretty big questions about consciousness too, right?
Oh yeah. Like if consciousness is just motion becoming aware of itself, what happens to it when that motion transitions to a new form?
Right. These are questions that might be beyond the reach of science, at least for now.
Probably, yeah.
But I think it's so exciting that we're even asking them.
Absolutely. It just shows how powerful this concept of motion is. It opens up whole new ways of thinking about, well, about everything. This whole deep dive has just been a mind-blowing journey.
Hasn't it?
We started with the Big Bang
Yeah.
and ended up talking about consciousness and the nature of reality.
And all because of this one idea.
Motion.
Yeah, motion. It connects everything, and yet it's still so full of mystery and potential. It's pretty inspiring, if you ask me. I agree. It's a good reminder that the universe is this vibrant, always evolving dance. And we're all part of it, you know? We're all dancing along.
We are. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Yeah, let's give our listeners something to ponder.
Exactly. So here's a final thought. If motion truly is the fundamental reality of everything, then what does that mean for the future? The future of the universe, the future of humanity, even your own personal future.
Maybe the answer isn't about trying to predict what's going to happen, you know? And maybe it's about embracing the flow, the dynamism of all this motion, and just seeing where it takes us.